When I was growing up, my dad was a single parent working long hours, and all his family lived back in Ireland. This meant that during the summer holidays, my brother and I were pretty much left to our own devices, even when I was 7 and he was 13. It got us into a few scrapes over the years, but one memory still sends shivers down my spine: Greaves Hall. If I recall correctly, Greaves Hall was once an asylum, but it had been burned down a few times and left derelict for decades. It was one of the few points of interest in Banks, a small town where we lived for a short while. The last I heard, they were building a housing estate there, so I hope they've torn it down, but I haven't been back to Banks in years. As you'd expect, the place had a reputation for being haunted. One summer day, during England's annual 2 weeks of warm weather, my brother and his mates decided to head to Greaves Hall. Usually, they went to kick a football around, but we all knew they were really there to gawk at the ruins and come up with some flimsy excuse for why they chickened out of going inside. Being the annoying little sister, I pointed this out, loudly calling them cowards. Unfortunately, my big brother, being 13 and full of bravado, called my bluff. After spending several minutes mocking them, I felt my stomach sink as I realized I'd talked myself into joining them. We stopped by the corner shop for some 90s-era sugary snacks. Think neon-colored sweets and fizzy drinks, and one of my brother's mates slipped the shopkeeper some cash for massive bottles of White Lightning, a cheap, potent cider popular back then. For Americans, imagine a low-budget, high-alcohol version of hard apple juice that teenagers somehow always got their hands on. I was thrilled, convinced I'd get to sip some and magically become a pool shark, like my dad claimed he did after a few pints. He used to tell me stories of winning pub pool games when he'd had a drink or two, which, looking back, sounded a lot like Popeye's spinach-fueled feats, but with Guinness instead. So we trekked to Greaves Hall, my brother, his 5 friends, and me trailing behind. I tried to join their conversation, but they insisted it was adults only, especially when they started talking about some girl named Shira's figure. Honestly, I think they were starting to regret bringing me along. Things settled down once we reached the grounds. We had a 30-minute kickabout, during which I scored a hat trick, entirely because my brother threatened to wallop anyone who dared tackle me. After the game, we poked around the estate. The grounds were dotted with old buildings in various states of decay, surrounding the main hall. One of my brother's friends got fixated on a graffiti tag on what looked like a barn or storage depot, though it was hard to tell its original purpose. We stopped by a water tower where my brother, in a moment of gross genius, hooked a used condom onto a stick and chased everyone around with it, cackling like a madman. Next came lunch, fueled by numbers, those artificial food additives that made 90s snacks glow like toxic waste, and alcohol for the older boys. I wasn't allowed any cider, so my dreams of pool glory remained unfulfilled. As the heat of the day faded, we found ourselves with nothing left to do but face the main hall. "Go on then," my brother said, nodding toward the building. "After you," I shot back. "No, after you," proud of my quick wit. I've been rehearsing that comeback all afternoon. Having thoroughly mugged him off, I let them lead the way. My brother, with a swagger in his step and Dutch courage from the cider, marched forward, and the rest of us filed in behind. To be honest, the hall itself was a letdown. From the outside, it looked terrifying, crumbling, fire-damaged, with overgrown foliage creeping up the walls. Most windows were smashed, leaving gaping black voids that felt ominous even in daylight. Inside, though, it was just an old building, like any other of its age. You could tell it had been grand once, with traces of elegance in the architecture, but now the paint was peeling, and the floors were curling up at the edges. My brother and his friends quickly got bored of poking around the ground floor, and decided to venture up the rotten staircases, climbing one at a time to avoid a collapse. I was confined to the ground floor, which might sound like my brother being protective, but he'd used me to test dodgy stairs before, so I suspect he just wanted me out of his hair. My dad always gave me an earful if I didn't obey my big brother, so I stayed downstairs, kicking my heels in what I think was once the canteen. It was a large room, still showing signs of its former poshness with tiled floors and ornate wall details. To pass the time, I twirled around, pretending to be a ballerina, my trainers squeaking on the tiles. The others must have found something interesting upstairs because they were gone for ages. I got bored and started exploring again. I was inspecting a particularly nasty black fungus sprouting from the walls when I noticed a door that was either locked or swollen shut. It had a hole just wide enough for a scrawny 7-year-old to squeeze through. With no concept of tetanus or other dangers, I wriggled past the door, scraping my arms and grunting, into a moldy-smelling room. It contained a sluice and a pile of ancient cleaning equipment. The floor was littered with small brown pellets, which I now know were rat droppings. Part of the ceiling had collapsed in one corner, exposing the floor above. Naturally, I decided it was perfectly safe to climb onto an old basin, then a locker, and scramble up the wall until I could haul myself onto the next floor. I was pretty pleased with myself, lying on the damp floorboards of a room empty except for an overturned bed frame. I was already plotting how to mess with my brother in this supposedly haunted asylum when I glanced out the window and froze. There, just inside the tree line of the woods, stood a man in a black overcoat and hat. It's hard to judge height when you're a small kid on the first floor, but he looked well over 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered. He wasn't fat exactly, but his frame was imposing. Looking back, I assumed he was homeless, but he seemed too neat for that, his posture too upright, not like someone living rough. He stood perfectly still, staring through the empty window into the room. I could hear my brother and his friends laughing nearby, oblivious. Being a clueless kid, I dismissed the man under the ironclad logic that he wasn't supposed to be here. If he was, he'd be wearing a high-vis jacket like a proper worker. I turned back to the room, and that's when I saw it. Hidden behind the rusted bed frame, now visible as I approached, were signs of someone living there. A sleeping bag, reeking so badly it made me gag, lay crumpled on the floor. Scattered around were scraps of newspaper, a tow rope, a tangled pile of clothes, and most chillingly, a massive knife. I debated whether it was a sword or a knife. It was that big, with a blade at least 18 inches long, coated in a black oily substance and what looked like crusted blood. I reached down to touch it, my 7-year-old brain devoid of self-preservation, when I remembered the man in the tree line. I froze, my mind racing as I calculated just how much danger I might be in. Fear and indecision paralyzed me for a full minute. Then I heard it, the sound of feet scraping against stone just below the window by my head. Panic kicked in, and I bolted, tearing out of the room and down a moldy hallway into the room where my brother and his friends were laughing. "I want to go home," I blurted, my voice trembling. "How did you get up here?" my brother asked, but I knew he'd take too long to agree, especially if I mentioned the man. I was convinced that hulking figure was seconds away from storming in with that knife. So I tried a different tactic. "I want to go home now," I said, staring at my feet, using the pitiful look I'd perfected after years of begging to sleep in his bed after scary movies. "Who's the coward now, Sam?" my brother's chubby friend, who I'll call Heinous Belen, jeered. "Shut it, she's just a kid," my brother snapped. Normally, I'd have gone full Brad at being called a kid, but I was desperate to leave, so I let it slide. I practically dragged them out of that place. Heinous Belen took his sweet time on the stairs, but I didn't care. As we reached the entrance, I snatched the bottle of white lightning from my brother and sprinted toward the gate, shouting that I'd give it to Dad. It had the desired effect. They all chased after me, desperate to avoid a bullocking. I tried not to look back, terrified I'd see that man and lose all courage. But as we reached the corner leading to the street, I couldn't help myself. I glanced back. All I saw was that looming, terrifying building with its pitch-black windows. He could have been in any one of them, watching us. I didn't stick around to find out. I'm going to preface this by saying this story is secondhand, told to me multiple times by a friend I'll call Marv. I'm a natural skeptic and cynic, so I don't fully buy into it, but Marv's account was consistent, simple, and didn't waver across retellings. I've known him for years, and his advice on just about everything is always well-reasoned and helpful, so I take his word with a grain of salt. I'm not a seasoned writer, so the tenses might get jumbled, but I'll keep it as clear and accurate as I can. Marv enjoys solitary camping to connect with nature. He's also an avid gun collector and enthusiast, often bringing along a hunting rifle and a .45 sidearm for protection. A few years back, he couldn't recall the exact date, he decided on a whim to go camping. He packed his gear, including his firearms, and headed to a vast property owned by a friend, located near Kisatchie National Forest in south-central Louisiana. For Americans, Kisatchie is a sprawling wilderness of pine forests and bayous, known for its remote trails and wildlife. Marv had full permission to be there, which is important to note. To maintain anonymity, I won't get more specific than that, but it's miles of untouched forest and wilderness. Marv hiked deep into the property to a small clearing he'd found on previous trips, a spot he liked for its seclusion. He set up camp for the night. Skipping ahead to late afternoon, as he was cooking something over a fire, he heard leaves crunching and twigs snapping nearby. At first, he assumed it was an animal. Deer or hogs are common in those parts, and stood up to get a look. Peering through the trees, he spotted a man approaching, still a good many yards away. Marv's etiquette for encountering strangers in remote areas is cautious but friendly. He knows most people he meets out there are armed, like him, so he stays polite while keeping his guard up, watching for any ulterior motives. You never know what someone's up to in the middle of nowhere. Usually, he'll make small talk, figure out what they're doing, and sometimes even share a meal. He'd never met anyone truly dangerous before, except maybe one other time, but that's another story. Two things immediately set off alarm bells. First, Marv knew he was the only one with permission to be on this private property. Second, the man wasn't dressed for the location at all. He wore a plain white t-shirt, blue jogging shorts, white socks, and sneakers, hardly the gear for trekking through dense Louisiana woods. It was late summer, still warm and humid, with mosquitoes, ticks, and other bugs swarming. For context, in rural Louisiana, you cover up to avoid being eaten alive by insects, especially deep in the forest. Marv, who's been in those woods plenty, knew no one would casually stroll and dress like that unless they were lost or confused. Sensing something was off, Marv called out, "Hey there, do you need any help?" He said it loudly, definitely loud enough to be heard, but the man kept walking forward, staring straight at him. Now uneasy, Marv stood up and called out again, more firmly, "Man, can I help you with something, or what?" The guy was now 50 to 20 feet away, standing at the edge of the clearing, still locking eyes with Marv. Without breaking his gaze, the man spoke clearly. "Help me." Marv said he was already starting to feel genuinely worried, which is rare for him. He's as cool as a cucumber in tense situations, so for him to feel unnerved meant something was seriously wrong. He described the man's voice as odd, like it didn't belong, like something that didn't know how to talk was mimicking the phrase. The man, still motionless, repeated, "Help me," this time with slightly more emphasis. That's when Marv noticed what was truly off. The voice sounded more female than male, almost like a recording being played back. Even stranger, the man's lips and mouth didn't sync with the words, as if he was just opening his mouth, letting the phrase spill out, and closing it again. Marv, trying to stay calm, asked, "What do you need help with?" He didn't dare back away, or make any sudden moves. The man, still staring, said, "Help me," again, then repeated it 3 more times, slowly but not louder. Now thoroughly unsettled, Marv interrupted, barking, "All right, you need to leave now unless you actually need my help." "Do you need my help or not?" The man didn't miss a beat and started repeating, "Help me," again, this time taking a step toward Marv. At this point, Marv was completely unsure what he was dealing with. Assuming the man might be unstable or dangerous, he drew his .45 semi-automatic pistol, pointed it at the ground, and said, "Listen, you need to go. I don't care what you want." The man grew more animated, almost agitated, repeating, "Help me," louder and faster over and over, but he didn't step closer or back away. Marv, feeling he had no other choice, fired a warning shot into the ground in front of the man. What happened next was outright bizarre. The man stopped speaking mid-phrase, went silent, and still staring at Marv, began backflipping and somersaulting backward into the woods, like a gymnast performing a flawless routine. He disappeared from sight almost instantly. Marv described it as completely unnatural, like the man was pulled back by an invisible force, moving with an ease that defied physics. It was so out of place it left him stunned. Marv stood there, pistol still in hand, staring into the forest where the man had vanished. He heard no further movement, no rustling, no footsteps, nothing. It was as if the man had never been there. Despite the encounter, Marv, being the unshakable guy he is, stayed in the clearing that night and the next, with no further incidents. When he later shared the story with me and some friends, we pressed him for details. He said the more he thought about it, the more certain he was that the voice was definitely female, like a lure or mimicry, almost like a parrot repeating a phrase it had heard. He couldn't say what it wanted and never indicated he should follow or do anything specific. It reacted instantly to the gunshot, fleeing in that bizarre acrobatic way. Marv recalled one other detail. During the early morning of the first night, he'd heard what sounded like a gunshot in the distance, eerily similar to his .45. He thought he might have heard it again on his hike out. Hunters are common in the area, so it could have been coincidence, but he wasn't sure. After the incident, he researched the area online and found stories of skinwalkers, mimics, and other unsettling Native American folklore tied to Kisatchie and similar regions. These tales often describe creatures that can imitate voices to lure people, which lined up with his experience, though he had no tangible proof. Even as a skeptic, it made me wonder about what might lurk in the remote corners of the world, unexplained and untouched. I'm a 28-year-old guy, but this happened when I was about 23, working at a mom-and-pop pizza shop in a small farm town in Northern California, surrounded by a few suburbs. I did a bit of everything there, cooking, cleaning, delivering, since I knew the family well, and they trusted me to run things when they were away. This particular night, I was on delivery duty, and I got the weirdest order of my life. Everything seemed fine when I took the call. The lady ordered a pizza with anchovies, which always struck me as an odd choice. Salty little fish on pizza aren't exactly a crowd pleaser. She also made a point to stress that the pizza had to be hot when it arrived, or she wouldn't pay for it. No big deal, I thought. I grabbed the pizza fresh from the oven, tossed it into the warmer bag, and prioritized her delivery over others to ensure it stayed piping hot. I drove to her address, a standard one-story house in a newer housing development. Nothing creepy or rundown about it, just an average suburban home. I rang the doorbell, plastering on my fake customer service smile. You know, the one you force out to seem friendly even when you're exhausted. The moment she opened the door, I knew this was going to be trouble. She was an older woman, haggard, with the leathery skin of a lifelong smoker, maybe 50 years or more of cigarettes etched into her face. She looked me dead in the eyes and snapped, "It better be hot or I'm not paying like I told you on the damn phone." I kept my cool, saying, "I understand, ma'am. I made sure to stop by your place first, even though it was last on my list. It's fresh and hot. Bring it in and set it on the table," she ordered. Normally, I avoided going inside customers' homes. Too many creepy stories from Reddit threads like "No sleep" or "Let's not meet" had me paranoid. But I figured I'd kill her with kindness and see where this went. "No problem," I said cheerfully. "I also brought some extra cheese and ranch for you, just in case." As soon as I opened the bag, she snatched the pizza box, her hand rubbing the bottom like she was testing its temperature. "It's not hot enough," she barked. "You guys do this every time. I'm not paying for this, not a single dime. Now, I got a problem with my mouth. I don't always know when to shut up." Instead of backing off, I tried to reason with her. "Look, ma'am, your house is a 5-minute drive from our shop, and I came straight here. There's no way that pizza's cold. If you refuse to pay, we'll have to blacklist you, and I'll note it on your account." She stormed into the kitchen and came back with a pizza box from an order she'd placed with us weeks earlier. Before I could react, she hurled it at me, screaming, "Take your damn pizza and get out of my house. You're the devil." She kept yelling, calling me Satan and the devil over and over. My mouth got the better of me again. As I zipped up the warmer bag, chuckling bitterly about how much I hated my job, I said, "All right, ma'am, you won't be able to order from us again. Have a great day, and God bless you and your house." That set her off even more. She followed me outside, still screaming that I was the devil, while neighbors, families just out in their yards, watched the spectacle unfold. I got into my car and drove back to the shop, shaken but mostly just annoyed. When I got back, I told my manager what happened. Turns out, the lady had already called and screamed at her, claiming I'd cussed her out and gotten her order wrong. My manager, who knew me well, shut that down immediately, saying I'd never do anything like that. But then came the creepy part. The lady had whispered into the phone over and over, "Send him back, send him back." She kept this up, calling once a day for nearly 3 months, whispering the same phrase to whoever answered. She even started driving by the restaurant, yelling, The devil works here. You're all going to hell. I wasn't scared, exactly, just pissed off and itching to retaliate. It got worse when I noticed her car tailing me home from work some nights. One night, I'd had enough. I pulled over, got out, and confronted her. She stopped her car in the middle of the road, headlights blazing, shouting, "The devil is here." I jumped back in my car and sped off rattled. This went on for about 6 months. Eventually, I learned from her daughter that the woman was schizophrenic and bipolar and hadn't been taking her medication. The daughter had her moved to a care home. While cleaning out her mother's house, she found something chilling. Photos of me plastered all over the woman's bedroom wall, with the word devil scrawled across them in angry, jagged handwriting. The daughter tracked me down to explain everything and apologize. Thank God, that was the end of it. I never heard from the woman again, but the memory of those photos still gives me the creeps. I'm a 30-year-old guy married with a young daughter. This happened earlier this year when I was 29, living in a rural Northern California town right in the heart of the old gold rush country. The area has a certain vibe, maybe from the way the land was fought over and people killed for wealth back in the day. But it's always attracted odd characters, recluses, and folks who call themselves sovereign citizens, rejecting government authority. That said, this isn't a ghost story or a tale about weirdos in the woods. It's the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced as a father. I had an extra day off, so my wife and I decided to take a drive to a semi-local gun show, about an hour away. I'm into firearms, always on the lookout for obscure parts for old military weapons, and I have friends who regularly set up tables at these shows. We also had family in the area, so it seemed like a nice way to spend a day. It was a cold, gloomy day. Northern California had a brutal winter last year, but we bundled up, packed our infant daughter into her car seat, and headed out. The gun show was in a community center, a typical setup with vendors displaying rifles, handguns, and accessories. We knew the layout, so we walked right in, me carrying my daughter in a sling against my chest. She was tiny, barely a few months old, and ridiculously cute, so it wasn't surprising that people kept stopping to coo over her. It's normal at these events. Sweet older ladies and grandpa types love fawning over babies, asking her name or how old she is. One grumpy woman did comment that she was way too young to be at a gun show, saying she's like 3 months old. She'll never remember this anyway. I just shrugged it off, confused but not bothered. Among the crowd, one guy stood out. He was older, maybe in his 50s, and seemed more excited about my daughter than most. He mentioned he'd worked as an EMT and in an ICU for years, which made his enthusiasm for a healthy baby seem reasonable enough. As the afternoon went on, though, I noticed him passing by our path through the aisles a few more times, always moving against the crowd. Each time he'd comment on how beautiful my daughter was, his tone a bit too intense for my liking. It started to feel off, but I brushed it aside, figuring he was just overly friendly. Eventually, my wife needed to breastfeed our daughter. We headed out to our car, parked in the lot outside the community center. We'd set up window shades in the back seat, those privacy screens parents use to block out light and give a nursing mom some peace. I turned on a heater to keep them warm, locked the doors, and went back inside to help a buddy at his vendor table during a busy stretch. About 10 to 15 minutes later, my phone started ringing. It was my wife, frantic, her voice shaking so much I could barely make out what she was saying. Around the same time, I noticed a couple of sheriff's deputies at the show get up and head outside, which didn't register as significant until later. It took a moment to calm her down enough to get the story. Apparently, that same guy from the show had followed us out to the parking lot. He'd been watching the car closely, standing nearby as other cars left the lot. My wife saw a shadow by the door and realized he was right there, holding a small metal tube, possibly a tool or weapon, and trying to block the door from opening. She was terrified, clutching our daughter, unable to get out. At that exact moment, a sheriff's deputy pulled up, having noticed the man lingering near our car. The deputy asked what was going on. The man claimed he was just talking to my wife, but she cracked the window just enough to say she wasn't talking to him and didn't want him there. When the deputy asked for his name, the man gave one, then tried to slip away as the officer ran it through his radio. The name was fake. The deputy detained him, and within a minute of calling in his real name, They had him in cuffs. Turns out he had felony warrants for kidnapping. The realization hit me like a freight train. This guy had been waiting for the parking lot to clear, likely planning to try and take my wife and infant daughter. If that deputy hadn't been right there, who knows how it would have played out. I rushed to the car, my heart pounding, that sick feeling you get when your instincts scream danger. My wife was shaken but safe, and her daughter was okay, blissfully unaware in her mother's arms. The deputies handled everything, and we didn't have to deal with the guy again, but the what-ifs haunted me for weeks. I'm still not sure what to make of it. Maybe I was overthinking things, or maybe my gut was right. All I know is we were lucky a cop was there when we needed one. I live in a remote part of southern British Columbia, Canada, about a half-hour drive from the nearest town. My home is surrounded by dense forests, with only a few neighbors scattered in the distance. It's not uncommon to see deer, coyotes, wolves, bears, or even cougars around here, so we've always kept a large dog for protection. Our last dog had passed away, though, and our new one was just a puppy, not yet brave enough to guard the place. She wouldn't have been much help in this situation anyway. This happened the summer after my high school graduation, and it still gives me goosebumps. One day, a neighbor called and asked if I could tend to her garden while she and her husband went on a fishing trip. My family has known her for 20 years since we moved here. As kids, my sister and I would visit her, make craft and chat, and she let us splash around in her swimming pool during the summer. She's like family, and I'd helped her out plenty of times before, so it was no big deal to agree. I walked down the hill through the brush with my puppy tagging along, her tail wagging as she sniffed every leaf. The neighbor showed me her new garden, a stunning gated plot bursting with flowers and vegetables, meticulously cared for. For Americans, think of a picture-perfect backyard garden, like something you'd see in a homesteading magazine, but tucked away in the Canadian wilderness. She gave me quick instructions on watering and care, keeping it short because the mosquitoes were relentless, even in the morning. I retreated back up the hill to let my younger sister know we'd be handling the garden together. The first day was miserable. My sister and I got up early to beat the heat and the bugs, but the mosquitoes were waiting for us, buzzing in clouds around the garden. It took an hour and a half to water everything thoroughly, soaking the soil so it wouldn't dry out under the blazing sun. By the end, we were sweaty, covered in itchy bite marks, and thoroughly irritated. The schedule was to water every morning, but the next day, my sister flat out refused to go back. She'd grown about wanting to sleep in and told me to leave her alone. Not wanting to be responsible for killing our neighbor's prize veggies, I trudged down the path alone. My dogs were off chasing squirrels or some other adventure, so it was just me, accompanied only by the chirping of a few birds. As I got closer to the garden, the forest grew eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling, just stillness. I finished watering, stretching my back and wiping sweat from my forehead as I went to turn off the hose. That's when I heard something odd across the field from the garden, a voice faint but distinct. It sounded like a person, which was strange out here, miles from anyone. I froze, straining to listen. Then I heard it clearly, my sister calling my name in a shrill, exaggerated screech. My sister and I often messed around, calling each other in weird, dramatic voices just like that, but I knew she was too lazy to hike all the way down, sneak through the bushes, and cross a field just to prank me. I listened again, but there was nothing, just silence. I shook it off, figuring I'd misheard a bird or the wind, and finished up. The incident didn't stick in my mind at the time. Later, when I mentioned it to my sister, she laughed and teased that it must have been a wendigo or a skinwalker, creatures her friend had told her about. For Americans, these are figures from Native American folklore, said to haunt forests and mimic human voices to lure people. I don't know if they're the same thing or different, and I'm not one to believe in such stories, so I brushed it off. The next day, my sister reluctantly joined me to water the garden. Our puppy came along, bounding down the path with us. While we worked, I noticed her paw was bloody and panicked, thinking she'd cut herself on some sharp metal in the brush. I scooped her up and ran back to the house to check. It turned out the blood wasn't hers. She'd caught a pack rat and gleefully torn it to pieces. Relieved, I headed back to the garden, but my sister wasn't there. Confused, I started toward the neighbor's house to see if she'd gone inside. The neighbor came out to meet me, and that's when my sister appeared, looking pale and shaken. She said she'd heard my voice calling her name from across the field, in the same exaggerated, screechy way we used to joke around. She was visibly spooked and insisted we go back home, refusing to stay in the garden another minute. I thought she was pulling my leg, waiting for her to crack and admit it was a prank, like she usually did. But she didn't. She just stood there, arms crossed, refusing to walk back alone. I told her she could head up without me, but I had to finish watering. I wasn't about to let the garden die on my watch. She stayed, clinging close, still rattled. We finished up and hiked back together, practically glued to my side. For the next 3 mornings, we watered the garden without any other strange occurrences. My sister swears she wasn't lying about hearing my voice, and I believe her because I heard hers too. I don't know if Wendigos or skinwalkers are real, or if they're clever enough to mimic us so perfectly. We've lived in these woods our whole lives, often being loud and silly without worrying about disturbing anyone. But if something was out there, close enough to listen, it would have had plenty of time to learn our voices. The fact that these incidents only happened when we were alone still sends chills down my spine. I always hated the town I lived in. I moved there alone at 18 for college and quickly regretted it. It was a decent-sized town, but full of trouble. Gas stations were robbed regularly, shootings happened in broad daylight, and break-ins were common. For the first 3 years, I lived with roommates in a part of town that wasn't too bad, though still sketchy. When I started making enough money, I decided to move out on my own. I found a tiny house, maybe 500 square feet, old and poorly built. But it was just me, so I didn't mind the size. What sold me was its location. In the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields and patches of woods, with only a few houses nearby. After years of paranoia about getting mugged or worse in town, the idea of living somewhere quiet and isolated felt like a dream. I moved in at the beginning of July, and for the first month, everything was great, except for the lousy internet, which was a hassle for streaming or gaming. To keep me company, I got a dog, a friendly mutt who loved lounging in the yard and trying to charm the nearest neighbor into petting him. He seemed to love the place as much as I did. About 2 months in, though, I started noticing strange things. An old roommate was using my spare room to store some of his stuff until he settled into his new place, so he had a key to the house. He'd pop in every couple of weeks to grab something, usually letting me know beforehand. But I'd come home to find small things out of place. A kitchen chair pulled away from the table, a bowl in the sink when I swore I'd washed it. They were minor enough that I chalked it up to my roommate swinging by unannounced or me being forgetful. Then my dog's behavior changed. Up until that point, he was chill, barely noticing when I left for work. He'd just sprawl on the couch, chewing his toys, never barking or acting up. Suddenly, he developed severe separation anxiety. Every time I tried to leave, he'd wedge himself in the doorway, barking and whining, almost screaming. He wouldn't stop until I came back inside. It was like he was desperate to keep me from leaving him alone in the house. I couldn't afford a kennel, so I tried to find a way to calm him down. One day, I had a short errand to run at work and knew I'd be back early. Thinking the sound of voices might soothe him, I put on a DVD of Hamlet, a 5-hour version, boring as heck, but long enough to keep playing while I was gone. For Americans, think of it like leaving a long, droning Shakespeare play on to babysit your dog. I was gone for 3 hours, well before the movie should have ended. When I walked in, not only was the movie off, but the TV and my Xbox, which I'd used to play the DVD, were completely powered down. I immediately called my roommate to ask if he'd been over, but he wasn't even in town. I explained the situation, and he suggested the TV might have shut off on its own after idling too long. That didn't add up, though. First, a 5-hour movie was supposed to be playing. It couldn't have idled. Second, even if the TV had shut off, the Xbox wouldn't have. I'd left it on for days by accident before, like when I went out of town, and it was always still running when I got back. This time, it was fully off, like someone had hit the power button. Nothing was missing, and the door was locked when I got home. I tried to convince myself it was a glitch with the Xbox and let it go. But my dog got weirder. He'd always been friendly with a neighbor, a middle-aged woman who lived a short walk away. He used to wag his tail and try to lure her over for pets when she passed by. All of a sudden, he started acting terrified of her. One day, she walked by while he was in the yard, and he yelped, bolting toward me like she was a threat. That behavior stuck, and it made me suspicious of her. I started taking precautions, buying cheap door alarms that would chime if the doors were opened. I also kept my pistol by my bed at night, just in case. The second night after installing the alarms, I was jolted awake by the one on the back door going off. I grabbed my pistol and rushed out, heart pounding, trying to psych myself up to confront an intruder. When I got to the back door, it was shut and no one was there. But the alarm wasn't just triggered, it had been knocked clear across the room, landing a good 10 feet away. The door would have had to open wide for it to fall like that. It couldn't have just slipped off. Even stranger, the door was locked, but not the way I'd left it. I always locked both the knob and the deadbolt, but the knob wasn't locked this time, just the deadbolt. I checked the whole house, but nothing was out of place, and there was no sign of anyone. I called the police, but they couldn't do much without a witness or evidence. They took a report and left, leaving me rattled. I changed the locks the next day, and the weird incidents inside the house stopped. Later, I found out something unsettling. The neighbor my dog now hated had lived in my house before I moved in, and the landlord had never changed the locks. I can't prove it, but it seems obvious she had a key and was coming and going as she pleased. Why, I'll never know. Nothing of mine went missing. The most disturbing part is that she tried to come in at night, only stopped by the alarm. I can't help but wonder how many times she'd been in my house while I was asleep, creeping around in the dark, and what she was doing there. I don't think I'll ever get used to it. Even after all these years, I still wake up some nights, heart racing, certain I heard a child crying. My husband, Tom, just rolls over and pulls the pillow over his head. He's tired of hearing about it, and I can't blame him. It all started when I was 16. My parents bought an old Victorian house in Millfield's historic district, one of those grand early 1900s homes with high ceilings, creaky floors, and more rooms than our family of four needed. My sister Abby and I were supposed to share the big upstairs bedroom, but she took one look at it and refused. "Something's off about that room," she said, wrinkling her nose. "It feels watched." My mom tried to convince her it was fine, but Abby wouldn't budge. She claimed the smaller bedroom down the hall, leaving me with the spacious master bedroom all to myself. I didn't mind at first. What teenager wouldn't want the biggest room in the house? Plus, I've always been the practical one. Ghosts and monsters were just stories to explain the groans of an old house settling. I remember moving day vividly. It was mid-August, swelteringly unbearable, and the house had no central air, just a couple of rattling window units that barely cooled the place. My dad and his buddies were hauling furniture up the narrow staircase while my mom played traffic cop. I decided to get my room in order before unpacking. I'm obsessive about cleanliness, always have been. The previous owners had the house professionally cleaned, but it wasn't up to my standards. I spent hours wiping down baseboards, dusting windowsills, and vacuuming every inch of the faded floral carpet. By the time I finished, my t-shirt was soaked with sweat, but the room was pristine. I went downstairs to grab my first box of stuff. When I returned 5 minutes later and set the box on the floor, something caught my eye, a dime, sitting right in the middle of the freshly vacuumed carpet, face up. I picked it up, puzzled. I just vacuumed that spot, and the carpet still showed the vacuum lines. There's no way I'd have missed a coin. Examining it, I realized it wasn't a regular dime. It was a mercury dime from 1938, with the winged Liberty head worn but distinct. For Americans, mercury dimes are old silver coins, collectible but not rare, often found in old houses. I turned it over in my palm, feeling its weight. For some unexplainable reason, I felt compelled to keep it. I slipped it into my pocket and kept unpacking, figuring old houses hide little treasures like that. Maybe it had been stuck in a crevice and worked loose. I didn't think much of it then. About a week later, my mom came up to help me hang curtains. She was on a stepladder by the window when she gasped and nearly fell. I rushed to catch her, "What's wrong?" I asked. Her face was ashen. "There was someone standing right there," she whispered, pointing to the corner by my closet. "A shadow, but solid." When I gasped, it turned its head toward me, then walked to the window and vanished. I looked where she pointed. Nothing but faded wallpaper and my dresser. I told myself she was just tired from the move, maybe dehydrated from the heat. But 2 weeks later, she saw it again in the same spot. After that, she refused to step foot in my room. Then the footsteps started, always upstairs, always when everyone was downstairs. Heavy, deliberate steps crossed the attic above my bedroom, from one end to the other. My dad checked the attic multiple times but found only dusty boxes from previous owners and some ancient Christmas decorations. The strangest thing was the cigarette packs, empty Lucky Strikes, a brand none of us smoked, tucked in corners or behind boxes. For Americans, Lucky Strikes were a popular mid-20th century cigarette brand, now less common. My dad would toss them out, but days later, they'd reappear, sometimes in different spots. Always the same brand, always empty. By now, Abby was smug about dodging my room, and I tried to act unbothered, but it was getting to me. I couldn't sleep, lying awake at 3 a.m., listening to those footsteps pacing above, wondering who or what was up there. The Mercury dime became my talisman. I kept it on my nightstand, and when sleep wouldn't come, I'd hold it, running my thumb over its worn surface. It was oddly comforting, like a link to the house's history that wasn't entirely terrifying. 3 months in, I decided to try something. I had a Zune media player, basically a clunky MP3 player from the pre-iPod era. I wiped its files and set it to record in my room one night while I was downstairs doing homework. The house was silent. My parents were out, and Abby was at a friend's. When I played the recording later, I nearly dropped the Zune. Through the static, clear as day, was a child's voice, young, maybe 5 or 6, distinctly female, asking, "What was this?" The emphasis on this felt like she was pointing at something specific. I played it for my parents. My dad suggested interference from a baby monitor or radio, but his expression said he didn't believe it. My mom stared at the player like it might attack her. After that, things escalated. The footsteps grew more frequent. Objects in my room shifted slightly. An alarm clock moved a few inches, a book nudged off-center. My alarm would go off randomly at night. Sometimes I'd wake to find my closet door open, though I always closed it before bed. I started researching the house's history at the local library, which had records dating back to its construction in 1904. It was first owned by the Henderson family, a banker, his wife, and 3 kids. Nothing tragic stood out. They lived there for nearly 20 years before selling. Digging deeper, I found something chilling. In 1938, the year on my dime, a 6-year-old girl named Emily Wilson, daughter of the 3rd family to own the house, died after falling down the main staircase and breaking her neck. The newspaper article said her mother was devastated, claiming to hear her daughter's footsteps upstairs for months afterward. The family moved out within a year. I kept this to myself, knowing it would freak out my mom and my dad would dismiss it. Was Emily the one pacing in the attic, leaving the dime, speaking on my recording? We lived in that house for 2 more years until my dad's job transferred us out of state. By then, we'd grown accustomed to the oddities, footsteps, moved objects, the occasional shadow that vanished when you blinked. I started to feel protective of Emily, if that's who it was. She seemed lonely, not malicious. When we moved, I took the Mercury dime, unable to leave it behind. I had it made into a necklace, wearing it most days under my shirt. Life moved on. I went to college, got a job, met Tom, and 5 years ago, we bought our first house. A brand new build in a development outside town. No history, no previous owners, no chance of lingering spirits. Or so I thought. 6 months in, it started, faint voices in our bedroom at night, like whispered conversations just out of reach. Crying woke me from deep sleep, sounding like it came from the foot of our bed. Tom claimed he didn't hear anything. One night, at 3 a.m., I woke to a child sobbing. So vivid I sat up and flipped on the lamp. The room was empty, but the crying lingered for a few seconds before fading. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Tom, who was groggy, rubbing his eyes. Hear what? He mumbled, but his face said he had. The crying, I said. It sounded like a little girl. He sat up, suddenly alert. Eleanor, we've talked about this. I don't want to hear about ghosts or spirits. This is a new house. No history, no dead kids, no tragedies. It's just pipes, or the wind, or your imagination. But I knew what I heard. For weeks, Tom tensed whenever I mentioned the sounds, so I stopped bringing them up. One night, after clear whispering woke me, I clutched my mercury dime necklace, which I still wore to bed. The moment my fingers closed around it, the whispering stopped. The room turned so cold I could see my breath. Then for a split second, I saw her, a small girl in an old-fashioned dress, braids neat, standing at the foot of our bed. She looked at me, one hand outstretched, her eyes lighting up as they fell on the dime. Then she was gone, and the room warmed. I lay there, heart pounding, wondering if Emily had followed me from the old house, tied to the dime, or if I was losing my mind. The next day, I took off the necklace and put it in my jewelry box. That night, no voices, no crying, complete silence. This lasted a week. I started to think it was all in my head, that the dime was a psychological trigger. Then I woke one morning to find a dime on my nightstand, face up, removed from its chain, just like I'd found it in my childhood bedroom. I knew it had been in the jewelry box the night before. Tom saw it too and couldn't explain it. Fear flickered in his eyes. Get rid of it, he said. Throw it away, bury it, whatever. Just get it out of our house. I should have listened, but that same inexplicable pull stopped me. I put the dime back in the jewelry box and locked it. That night was the worst. The crying was so loud it woke us both. Frost formed on our bedroom windows, and the whispering wasn't vague anymore. It was a clear, childish voice repeating, "It's mine, it's mine, it's mine." I grabbed the dime from the box with trembling hands. The moment I touched it, everything stopped. The room warmed, the crying ceased, the house fell silent. Standing in the dark, the dime cold in my palm, I realized this wasn't about the house. It was about the dime, or whatever was attached to it. Tom wanted it gone, but I couldn't just toss it. I took it to a numismatist, a coin expert, hoping for answers. He confirmed it was a 1938 mercury dime, worth about $10 due to its wear, nothing special. When I asked about objects having attachments, he gave me a skeptical smile. You mean like cursed objects? That's not my expertise. As I left, he called after me. Coins pass through countless hands over decades. Who knows what energies they pick up? If I were you, I'd listen to your husband. Some things aren't worth keeping. I still have the dime stored in a small wooden box lined with salt, something I read online to contain spiritual energy. The activity in our house is quieted, but it hasn't stopped. On still nights, I hear faint whispers. Twice, I found the box moved from where I left it, though it's never been opened. Tom pretends not to notice, but I catch him staring at it with dread. He stopped asking me to get rid of it. I'm not sure I can, not because I'm attached, but because I'm afraid of what might happen. What if Emily, or whatever's tied to the dime, follows it? What if giving it away passes this to someone else? Last week, I woke to a small indentation on the edge of our bed, like a child had been sitting there. When I reached out, my hand passed through air, so cold it burned. I heard a soft giggle, then silence. I don't know if Emily wants her dime back or something else. I don't know why she followed me to this new house or why she seems content to just make her presence known. All I know is that finding that dime connected us, and that connection isn't breaking anytime soon. The wooden box is on my dresser now. I swear it was locked in my bedside drawer when I started writing this, but here it is. I don't have the courage to check if the dime is still inside.